Latin America now is not between conservatism and communism. It is between liberal governments and communist governments. And I think the best way he feels he can demonstrate his support of liberal, non-communist governments is to do something to aid Romulo Betancourt in Venezuela, because if he goes, the doors are going to be open.
Well, Sandy, it seems to me both you and Wilson Hall are talking about pouring more money into aid programs in Latin America. These aid programs, I'm sorry to say, haven't worked out too well in any part of the world. Laos right now is a pretty good example. Korea is another example. When the showdown comes, they seem to fold up. In some of these countries, we have crooks to deal with. In some of the other countries, we have incompetence. I think perhaps the time has come for us to move in with our aid program to administer many affairs of that country, in effect to take over the country if that country, the leaders of that country, will not conduct themselves the way we think they should conduct their country.
Come, Cecil. Look, what you're preaching is American empire. Emotionally, I love the idea. I like to hear you talk about it, but you know and I know that practically it would play straight into Moscow's hands and it would lead to disaster.
John Rich?
Wilson, I'd like to get back to Cuba. What about that opposition to Castro? Is there really any? Is it strong? Do they have any chance of taking over?
The opposition in Cuba is strong and is growing stronger every day. However, as that grows stronger, so does Castro's power, his police power, grow in order to stamp it out.
You had some experiences with that police power, didn't you? Would you tell us about it?
Well, I had some experience with policemen for 56 hours and 10 minutes, I might say, in a jail. However, the interesting thing about that to me was that the Cuban people are still very friendly, very nice, and they were while I was in jail. And I think perhaps this is the only hope of Castro's Cuba, or Cuba without Castro, is the people who are good.
Cecil Brown, you raised the point a while ago that our aid programs have not, for example, saved Laos, and you rather strongly suggested that we take more militant action in some of these countries. I suspect you believe we've reached a point of political and diplomatic bankruptcy in your part of the world, and that Kennedy can find small comfort where you come from.
Well, that's true, Frank. I think when John Kennedy takes office, he'll have to deal immediately with that raging civil war in Laos, if Laos hasn't already been taken over by the Reds. And Kennedy's difficulties will be aggravated because there's a rather profound conviction in Asia that the United States has no real intention of fighting to hold any position. And Laos is only one of the worsening situations that Kennedy faces. The results of the unsteady, unsure direction of U.S. policy are going to be hard to erase from Asian minds. And Red China's power to make mischief is continually expanding. Asian countries see Communist China on the march in Asia, and they don't see much evidence that the United States or other countries of the free world can set up effective barriers. Therefore, the spirit of accommodation with the Reds is starting to boom. There's a galloping trend toward neutralism in Japan. Japan is now headed in that direction. In my view, the U.S. bases in Japan are now doomed. Some of the best friends the United States has in Japan now take this attitude that U.S. bases on Japanese soil provide no protection. They only arouse the antagonism of Russia and Red China. Therefore, get rid of the bases, and any communist threat to Japan would disappear. And that's the developing attitude, Frank, all through Asia. Take economic aid from both sides and gain security by avoiding commitments to either side. And the Kennedy administration will have to build a program around that reality in Asia.
Cecil, I quite share your feeling of grave apprehension about any development of neutralism among our allies, the important ones like Japan particularly. But aren't you overlooking the possibility that neutralism is the only real solution to a problem like Laos? After all, Laos was supposed to be set up as a neutral area, and I can assure you that the British and French governments, too, but strongly the British, believe that neutralism is the only possible way of keeping Laos out of communist hands.
Yes, Joe, but the British idea of neutralism at the moment for Laos has been to introduce into the Laotian government the communist Pathet Laos group. This group, in my opinion and the view of most Asian observers, would manage to take over the Laotian government in 6 months. Therefore, the British program of a coalition government as a road to neutralism is actually opening the door to Laos going